I want to tell you about the richest square mile on Earth, a place with more than 1,000 named and mined gold veins, all in a comparatively small area. And most of those veins yielded super rich gold ore, and the placers that formed from the erosion of all those little veins were amazingly rich as well. How did so much gold get concentrated into a comparatively small area? Well, in this video, we're going to dig in and find out. Rich gold deposits are what we're trying to find as gold prospectors, so let's dig in and find out about this rich gold district, the richest square mile on Earth. The gold discoveries of Western Australia came kind of late in history because it's a very dry area without a lot of water, and it's tough to travel without getting yourself in danger of dying of thirst and that kind of thing. If you get lost, there's not a lot of support. Now, the eastern part of Australia, the goldfields there had been in production for decades before the very first gold deposits in Western Australia were discovered. The first residents of Western Australia were, of course, the Aboriginals, but because the area is so dry and so little water, it really only supported small populations, although there were Aboriginals there for thousands of years. Gold was first discovered in Western Australia in Kimberley in 1885. But this was a pretty short-lived small discovery. More gold was discovered in the Southern Cross area in 1888, and this was a little bit better find, and it caused some excitement, and there was significant mining there for several years before things started to peter out. Gold mining in Western Australia was in a kind of a depressed state when the discovery of gold was made at Coolgardie in 1892, and this was a much more important find and attracted quite a few prospectors. So by June of 1893, there was a rumor of a find out toward the east or northeast of Coolgardie, and some prospectors set out to see if they could find anything in the area. Paddy Hanahan and Tom Flanagan were trudging through the dry land, headed in the direction of the rumored find that they'd heard about, when one of their horses lost a shoe. Well, this brought their travel to a halt while they were still about 25 kilometers from their planned destination. And even though they hadn't planned to work here, Paddy looked around and the land looked good to him. It looked like there was potential. So they decided to stay for a few days and explore the area to see if maybe they could find gold there. While they were deciding what to do, there were other people passing through the area, and Paddy spotted a guy named Daniel Shea, who was a friend of his, and he invited Shea to join himself and Flanagan. And they thought together that they would explore the area for a few days before they moved on to the new discovery that they were trying to reach. Within a few days, the three Irish prospectors found an alluvial deposit of gold, which was really rich. They began to work, and within a few days, they'd recovered more than 100 ounces of gold. That's pretty darn good. Now, Paddy Hannan was the only one of the three that could read or write, so they sent him back to the nearest town site, which was at Coolgardie, to record the claims and apply for a reward claim for making a new find. They needed to record the claim to make everything official. So on June 17th, 1893, Paddy, with his saddlebags loaded down with gold nuggets, headed off on one of the good horses to get back to Coolgardie and file their claim. The deposits were so rich that while he was gone on his errand of claim filing, the other two guys, Flanagan and Shea, found more than another 100 ounces of gold in the alluvial deposits that were there. When Paddy Hannan reached Coolgardie, the word leaked out. They saw the nuggets that he had, and the rush was on. It's estimated that a week later, there were 1,400 men out there exploring the area, finding gold, and working the deposits. Miners came in first by the hundreds and then by the thousands because the area was super rich and people flocked to it, and more reports went out, and the more reports went out of how rich it was, the more people came in. The rush was so extreme, it was a veritable riot to get out there. Soon people were out there setting up stores and supply centers, and miners were flocking in. There was a shanty town of tents and other simple buildings that the miners were living in order to work their claims, and people, of course, were selling food and other goods to them to supply them while they were out there. By Christmas of 1893, there were more than 100 new claims that had been staked out there. And small miners, they either teamed up or individually had simple equipment to work the alluvial deposits, but they started finding veins too, signs of these many veins in this small area. And they were working the placers and alluvial gold with things like dry blowers. Let's take a look at the early life in Kalgoorlie.
Here's a couple of gents doing some dry washing, or dry blowing as it's known in Australia. And they're go ahead and work in the ground. We've got one guy shoveling material in, and then the other guy operating it. The man at the machine lifts it up and moves it up and down. And then on the ground there below him at the bottom of the machine is a set of bellows. And by lifting it, he opens the bellows, and then by pushing it down, the air comes up through the dry blower or dry washer. And that's how it works. A bellows was required. They didn't have little machines, little engines to supply air, these primitive systems. But in the early days of Kalgoorlie, a lot of the gold was recovered by dry blowing or dry washing. People traveled however they could to get to these remote gold fields, and the lucky ones, of course, could afford some camels like these to carry their gear, and they could just walk along. The camels were great because they only required water every few days. They could make it through this dry territory. And in fact, there's still some wild camels that live in this part of Australia. When I visited there, I saw some camel footprints. I never actually saw any live camels. The prospectors who were not so well off, of course, couldn't afford camels or horses and had to go by pushcart with their own self, their feet being the method of propelling themselves along. You can see this guy's outfit is pretty extensive. I'm sure it was quite heavy. You can see right over the wheels in the front, there's a set of bellows. So you know for sure that somewhere in this pile of gear, he's got the setup for a dry blower, a dry washer, to be out and get some gold for himself. The miners lived in some pretty primitive kinds of conditions, stuff that was ramshackle and put together. And like many mining districts in the U.S., Australia, and elsewhere, the miners would live right in, on, and amidst their diggings. That way, when they were taking a break, they could keep an eye on things and make sure that no claim jumpers moved in.
Prospectors came from not only all over Australia, but soon they were coming in from all over the world as the news spread all around. The miners were living in ramshackle huts, and they lived in these simple huts for an extended period of time while they were working their claims. In 1894 alone, some 25,000 men traveled to Western Australia to work in the goldfields. Many of them came because there was a depression gripping Victoria and South Australia in the eastern part of the country. Many came over by boat and then would, from whatever port they arrived, and then they would travel by whatever means, some on foot, some on horseback. A number of them took camels. And although many men got rich in this big gold rush, Paddy Hanahan himself never really was among the really rich guys. He died in 1925 in Melbourne, a relatively poor man. The miners soon recognized that the very rich alluvial gold deposits they were working were shedding off some very rich gold vein. The main zone or area of these deposits became known as the Golden Mile. It was a stretch of gold mines at various sizes that were clustered around Paddy Hanahan's original find. While some 65% of the gold that was found in these deposits in the hard rock veins was native gold, another 30% or 25 to 30% was in the form of rich gold-bearing telluride minerals. The last 5 or 10% were in various sulfides and other combinations with various other minerals, including sulfides like pyrite. The refractory minerals like the pyrite and as well as the telluride minerals all needed to be roasted to liberate the gold that they contained. Now I have a whole video on the telluride minerals telling all about them and the different ones that are out there, and I'll put a link to that up above and also in the description down below, so that if you want to take a look at that and find more about these rare and unusual but very rich telluride minerals, you can pursue that. Now, gold-bearing tellurides were first found in the Golden Mile area in May of 1896. This was several years after the original discovery and several years of heavy-duty mining that took place before they really realized that these sulfides, or that these telluride minerals, were not just sulfides. A lot of times the telluride minerals can have a color similar to pyrite and other sulfides, and sometimes miners will mistake them for the not very valuable pyrite and not realize that they're super rich telluride minerals. Prior to 1896, when they discovered that these telluride minerals were present and actually quite abundant, they took material that had this stuff that didn't have a lot of native gold but had these tellurides, and they'd put it in the street, or they'd put it in the mine dump, or they'd use it to cover other areas and just basically use it as mine waste. So for a short time, the streets of Kalgoorlie really were paved with gold, or at least gold-bearing minerals. When the miners discovered the mistake that they'd thrown this stuff away when it was super valuable, they dug up the streets and other areas where they disposed of this stuff so that they could take it out to get treated and get the gold extracted. Let's take a look at some examples of rich Kalgoorlie ores and the gold that these fabulous mines produce.
Here is a small but extremely rich piece of the kind of ore that was produced in the veins at the Golden Mile in Kalgoorlie. The white, of course, is quartz. There's lots of free gold there. And then the more silvery minerals is more of the tellurides. And this kind of stuff basically has huge value even in a few pounds. And lots of stuff like this was produced from these mines, especially in the early days. Here is another small but extremely rich specimen from the Golden Mile zone there in Kalgoorlie. And you can see this has real coarse gold. This kind of stuff, even a very small amount was hugely valuable, and they were mining huge amounts of it. And you can see that the erosion of veins like this would yield to very rich placers and alluvial deposits on the surface. And the area certainly did produce some very impressive nuggets of gold. Now, this is something that's been found in more modern times with a metal detector in the Kalgoorlie area, but I don't know the exact weight, but I'd guess it's in the 30 to 40 ounce range. It's pretty impressive. And it just shows what the old timers were going after. They were going after some really nice alluvial gold. Here's another Golden Mile specimen from Kalgoorlie. You can see this is super rich in the telluride minerals. It's largely quartz, but it's colored gray by a mixture of sulfides and tellurides. The whiter material, of course, is quartz. There's probably, I'm sure, a little bit of free gold in this, but this specimen is mostly rich in tellurides. This is another specimen of super rich Kalgoorlie ore. The yellow material is mostly pyrite. Of course, there's some quartz there. There's gray looking, which you'd probably guess were sulfides, but it's really more calaverite, which is an important mineral. It's the gold-bearing telluride mineral that's most common in Kalgoorlie. Here's another specimen of Kalgoorlie super rich ore. This has both pyrite and then various calaverite tellurides, and is more of this super rich ore that was mined in one of those 1,000 veins which make the Golden Mile so very rich. Here is a very unusual gold and telluride specimen from Kalgoorlie. I got a lot of these specimens of the various rich calaverite, gold, and stuff, minerals, the specimens that I'm showing you. I took these pictures at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. They had a collection of these specimens that was really very impressive, and I took pictures when I was there. Now, this one has an unusual formation of gold. You see that piece sticking up there. And then, of course, the calaverite, which is the gold telluride. But it also has what's called, you can see on the little marker there, Coloradoite, which is a mercury telluride. So when they roast these tellurides, when they roast these ores to extract the gold from them, the Coloradoite is going to vaporize and emit mercury vapors. So they need to have some sort of capture device to collect the mercury vapors so they don't escape into the atmosphere. This is another somewhat unusual specimen in that it is free gold, as you can see, wrapped around crystals of magnetite, the iron oxide mineral that's strongly magnetic. Not a lot of the Kalgoorlie ore looks like this, but this is a super rich specimen, and because of the beautiful gold and the dark magnetite, is exceptionally beautiful. Now, up to this point, I've shown you Kalgoorlie ores that come from deep in the mines. They're not oxidized. They're not from near the surface. They're from deep down. But this is a piece of what the early day miners would have seen. It's well oxidized ore from near the surface. All the pyrite that was in it has been oxidized to rusty brown iron oxides. And there is free gold in this. This is fairly rich ore, maybe not quite as rich as some of the pieces I've just shown you, but still very rich ore. But this is what the old-timers would have seen on the surface.
Once the miners started getting into the hard rock stuff, companies of miners grouped together, pooled their claims, and pooled their resources so that they could dig deep into these veins and lodes that were found in this concentrated Golden Mile area. Companies also came in and bought some of these small miners out. A capital from Europe and the United States went in to start larger scale, more serious underground mining operations. And the underground mining industry expanded rapidly. Between 1894 and 1896, some 960 new companies were formed on the London Stock Exchange to mine this rich gold ore. And with the big gold rush came development of the site, and the town was built, and people moved into more permanent residences because they saw that this was an operation, this was a deposit that was going to continue to work and continue to be mined. It wasn't something that people weren't just going to come in, take what they could get, and then as the things played out, they would move on to some other discovery. Railway lines linked up Kalgoorlie with Perth, and new materials and heavier equipment could be brought in to work in the mines. The Western Australian government was really not well equipped to deal with this big rush of new people coming in and the new towns and settlements that were being formed. Water was one big problem, and safety was another. The mines themselves were not well handled for safety, and working in the mines became a very dangerous occupation. Accidents were quite common. Perhaps the most important development in these early years was a water pipeline that brought drinking water in from an area near Perth to the Kalgoorlie area and allowed people to have sufficient water for good sanitary life and food processing and that sort of thing. The good supply of fresh water was an important factor to the sustainability of the community. Now, gold has been mined in this area since June of 1893 on a continuous basis, but production reached a peak in 1903, 10 years after discovery, when they produced 1.2 million ounces in a single year. However, the effects of rising mining costs as the lodes and the veins were pursued deeper and deeper into the ground, and the ores, as they went deeper, became more and more refractory and difficult to process, together with the depletion of the richest surface deposits or near surface deposits, led to a gradual decrease in production after 1903. Nevertheless, by 1910, Kalgoorlie was still a major operation with 10 major sized shafts and numerous smaller ones, all operating on a continuous basis in the rich Golden Mile area. However, continued rising costs, many of them at this time associated with the effects of World War I to increase inflation, led to a continued decline into the late 1920s. However, a reevaluation of some of the gold deposits and consolidation led to a revival that happened in the early 30s. Let's take a look at some of the early day mining and what it looked like in Kalgoorlie.
Here's a shot of some of the underground mines, and you can see there's quite a lot of timber. This is a station for filling the ore cars. On the far left and upper corner, you can kind of see some doors. The slats look like if they were pulled up, they would drop material in, and that's what happens. The ore cars are pulled up empty. The slats are raised, material is allowed to fall into the ore car, and then when the ore car starts getting full, they close the door down again. And then up and to the left, up at an angle, would be the stope where the miners are actually breaking down the vein rock and breaking it into loose material, which then falls through these chutes and loads up the ore cars for taking it out of the mine. Here's some miners using an early day jack leg. This type of jack leg, the vertical piece is fixed in place, and then the jack leg itself is moved up and down the vertical shaft. A modern jack leg has a hydraulic shaft that the miner is able to move around, that moves hydraulically based on the compressed air. Now, you'll see that there's only a little wood being used, and one of the things about Kalgoorlie, especially in the early days, they just didn't have a lot of wood for shoring and timbering, and so they used the minimum amount that they could possibly get away with, because unlike California and a lot of other places that were in the midst of well-timbered forests, and so wood was cheap and available, out in the deserts of Western Australia, there just wasn't the same amount of wood available.
Continued improvements in methods of mining and extraction led to a fairly stable production rate that continued into the 1960s, but by the 1960s, production again started to wane, and there were fewer and fewer actual mines that were in operation at the time. And in fact, in 1975, there were no operations in the actual Golden Mile area, but the nearby Mount Charlotte mine continued to operate and continued to produce gold from their underground operations. However, a pickup in price after 1975 and into the early 1980s led to a revival of mining, and some of the mines on the Golden Mile began to reopen, and production began to increase. And a number of the mines started working on the surface, moving lower grade materials that were too low to mine in the early days, but could be mined cheaply for surface mine material and processed at a profit. During this time, and in fact for the whole history of mining at the Golden Mile, there was consolidation and consolidation and consolidation. From the original operators where there were huge numbers of claims to fewer and fewer and fewer operations, but bigger and more capitalized and able to do more financially. Consolidation continued and continued until 1989, when finally Alan Bond, an Australian businessman, was able to buy some of the last outlier claims and consolidate the Golden Mile into one operation. The new operation that was consolidated was known as the Kalgoorlie Consolidated Gold Mines, and has been owned by different people through the years, including Barrick and Newmont, who are big miners here in Nevada, but it's currently owned by all Australian businesses as the mine continues to operate. The little pits that were started on the Golden Mile area were consolidated and continued to be mined since the late 80s as one operation, and has now known, and has been known since it was consolidated, as the Super Pit. The operations of the Super Pit, combined with the Mount Charlotte mine that's still ongoing and producing from underground operations, it currently produces about 850,000 ounces per year. An incredible amount, especially considering that there's been mining here for over 125 years. In 2019, the Consolidated Gold Mines poured their 50,000 gold bar from production operations, and it brought the total produced from the Golden Mile and adjacent properties to over 60 million ounces since that first discovery way back in 1893. The Kalgoorlie goldfield is part of the Yilgarn Craton, which is an area of old rocks that make up a large part of Western Australia. The Kalgoorlie district is centered in and around this Golden Mile zone. Like I say, the richest square mile on Earth. Now, gold ores have been found in a number of different kinds of adjacent rocks, but the bulk of the ore from the Kalgoorlie, from the Super Pit area, is found in what is known as the Golden Mile dolerite, dolerite is a rock that basically is a coarser grained basalt type rock. It's not coarse enough to be called gabbro, but it's way too coarse to be called basalt. Within the Super Pit, there are more than 1,000 named lodes and veins that are a part of the pit. And the pit is more than 3.5 kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers wide, and more than 500 meters deep. So that's over 2 miles long, over 1 mile wide, and over 1,500 feet deep. And the ore bodies of the underground Mount Charlotte mine are over 3,000 feet deep and more than 150 feet wide. It's mined on a large scale by block caving and other methods of open stope operations. The Kalgoorlie goldfield is part of the Norseman-Wiluna Greenstone Belt series of gold deposits. The principal host, as I say, is the Golden Mile dolerite, and within the dolerite, the principal deposits are veins, lodes, and breccia zones that have been mineralized by the fluids that are going through there, and are related to a very large fault zone called the Boulder-Lefroy Golden Mile fault zone that can be traced for a distance of more than 60 miles. Most of the lodes and vein deposits are steeply dipping and consist of fine-grained silica, cerussite, sulfide, and telluride-bearing gold quartz. Let's take a look at the Super Pit as it looks today and talk a little bit more about the area geology.
This is the Super Pit from an aerial view. It really is among the largest pits on Earth. Probably certainly is the largest one for gold. There are a few copper pits that are really, really huge as well. It's hard to get a feel for how really huge this is from this aerial view because you're way up. You can't see houses or trucks or people. It just dwarfs everything. It's so huge. Again, it's 3.5 kilometers long. This is a north-south view looking north, and it's 3.5 kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers wide, and 500 meters deep, which is really a huge size. Now, Nevada has some really huge pits and that are mined for gold along the Carlin Trend. And just for comparison's sake, I thought I would take a look. And the biggest one on the Carlin Trend is 2.5 kilometers long and about 1 kilometer wide and about 250 meters deep. So it's considerably smaller. But there are several large pits along the Carlin Trend, none as large as this one. But the total production from all the low-grade ore along the Carlin Trend actually exceeds the total production from Kalgoorlie. But still, for a concentration for the richest square mile, this is it. And that just produces fabulous ores. Now, the plan of the mining company is to expand this to the south, which would be toward the viewer. And so the foreground of what you see between you and the pit is going to become more pit. They're expanding it that way, and it's going to be a major expansion, and it's going to take them many, many years to mine it all out. So it's still in operation, it's still in production, and it's still very big and getting bigger. So here is a view looking across the pit, and with this kind of view, you really don't get a feel for how big and deep it is. But these big trucks drive literally for miles to get down to the bottom of the pit, where they can pick up a load of rock and then bring it up. And of course, if it's ore, it goes to the mill to be treated, and if it's waste, it goes to a stockpile. You can also see, looking across at the wall in the distance, how the surface is rusty iron red, and then as you get down, you lose the rust color and eventually get to a gray unoxidized material. This is showing you how the surface material is oxidized, but once you get deep enough, you get out of the oxidized zone and into the sulfides and other minerals that are a little bit tougher to extract the gold from. Here's a geology map that shows part of the Norseman Wiluna belt, greenstone belt, and where the Golden Mile pit is and where the Mount Charleston gold underground mine is. The little map up in the upper left kind of shows the northerly trend of the Norseman Wiluna belt, and there are gold mines on it both to the south of the Kalgoorlie area and to the north as well. It's a series of mines on this belt, and it has the right kind of rocks and the right kind of faults, and therefore has the right kind of gold deposits.
And not only is the Kalgoorlie goldfield the richest square mile on Earth because so much is packed into a small area, it itself is among the largest goldfields on Earth and is considered a supergiant gold deposit. And why is there so much gold there? It's because a combination of different factors that all work to increase gold levels all just happen to be present at the Golden Mile. These factors include close proximity to a large regional scale fault, which I just mentioned, more than 60 miles long, that help bring up fluids from deep in the earth. There's been a series of deformational events. They're very old, but the rocks were pushed and squeezed together by geologic forces. There are thick, iron-rich rocks which help remove the gold from the fluids that are being brought up from the earth. The rich deposits at Kalgoorlie are similar to a lot of other greenbelt deposits, some of the richest ones, including the Abitibi Gold Belt in eastern Canada, and have similar low sulfide, high gold types of concentrations in these greenstone belts. Exploration, even after all these years, continues to be done at Kalgoorlie, looking for new deposits. And in fact, the Super Pit, the company that owns it, is in the process of a very large expansion of the pit in the southward direction that will keep the pit operating for many years to come. Smaller companies are exploring along the Norseman Wiluna gold greenstone belt and looking for additional deposits that may be found there. Individual prospectors continue to explore the area with metal detectors, and some of them find some pretty good gold nuggets. And while there have been a few larger districts on Earth that have produced more gold total from low grade as far as high grade and the richest of the rich concentrations of gold on Earth, the Golden Mile at Kalgoorlie really takes the cake. But wherever you're prospecting, wherever you're looking for gold, what you know really makes the difference, and the skill of prospecting is something that needs to be learned so you can have more chances of success when you're out there in the field. Now, I've written a book that will help you learn those trade skills of prospecting, and the book is extensive and it's available, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book. It's called Fistful of Gold, because that's what I want you to find, is Fistful of Gold. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my book right now. This is my book, Fistful of Gold. It's an encyclopedia of everything you need to know to go out and find gold for yourself. It distills down my 45 years of experience out in the field prospecting, as well as my degree in mine engineering. It's Like I say, an encyclopedia, there's a lot to it. It's over 250,000 words long, hundreds of pages with hundreds of illustrations, teaching you what you need to know about geology, about mining districts, about techniques of finding gold. It covers metal detectors, sluicing, panning, dry washing, high bankers, you name it, it's covered in there. It talks some about platinum and diamonds, but it's mostly about gold because gold is more widespread. It is not so much a book about where to find gold, but a book about how to find gold. Because even if you have a location where gold was mined in the past and you go out there, well, where should you look to be successful in your prospecting, to find the gold that's there? This is the book that's going to tell you that information. I spent most of 10 years writing this book, so I thought a long time about it. It's got, like I say, lots of information and lots of illustrations, and I've had results from people who bought it. It's available on Amazon, but I recommend buying it through High Plains Prospectors, and I'll put a link in the description for buying this book through them. They have a better price than Amazon, and I have a special deal that I'll tell you a little bit more about, where you can get a 5% discount from the price even with that. On Amazon, the book rates a 4.7 out of 5, which means that of all the people that have bought it, they've been really highly satisfied, and I think you, if you buy my book, will be just as highly satisfied as well. Now let's talk a little bit more about High Plains Prospectors. They're a prospecting shop, a mail order prospecting shop that I've partnered with. The deal is that I can get you a 5% discount, a coupon code, and I'm going to put the code to that right here. It's just Chris Ralph, all caps with no space between Chris and Ralph. You put that in there as a discount code and you'll get 5% off their already really good prices. I think it's a great deal where you win by getting a discount, I get a little percentage of that, and they get new business. So if you need prospecting supplies, High Plains is really the way to go. And I'll put information, like I say, in the description more about how you can work with them, because I'm working with them. They really are great guys, a great company. For even more information, I also have a website, and I'm going to show you my webpage and talk a little bit more about that right now.
This is my webpage. It's located at NevadaOutbackGems.com. You can Google it, or I have a link down in the description below. But there's lots of information here, miscellaneous stuff, pictures, some historic information as well, stories. It's got a lot of great fun stuff. You'll probably be interested in it.
Now, on all of my YouTube videos, I encourage you guys to ask questions. If you have thoughts, comments, suggestions for things that I ought to look at in my videos, things that you want to find out more about, and I answer 100% of my questions. There's not very many YouTubers out there that answer 100% of their questions. I'm one of the few. And so I will do my best to answer what you have. I mean, I only can write so much. Sometimes the answer is something where I'm going to recommend that you buy the book and read about it. I also ask that you subscribe to my channel, click the bell notification so that every time I come out with a new video, you'll be able to watch it. And like I say, I cover a huge amount of topics. I also have 250 videos that I've already done. And so you can go back through my catalog of videos on YouTube. I'm sure there'll be many videos there that you'll want to take a look at, especially if you have any interest in gold or platinum, diamonds, gemstones, geology, and that sort of stuff. My YouTube site is going to be right up your alley. So I'll see you again real soon. We'll be out in the field and back in the office at the whiteboard, and whether we're looking at gold or platinum, diamonds, gemstones, or other interesting geology, it's going to be fun. You're going to enjoy it, and we'll see you again real soon.